For over 3,000 years, Egyptian scribes wrote Hieratic and Demotic, the cursive scripts that carried Egypt's daily life with a plant fiber brush. Then, in the Greco-Roman centuries, beginning around the 4th century BCE, a different instrument arrived from across the Mediterranean, a hard, split-nibbed reed pen, and it did not just replace the old tool. It physically pushed Egyptian cursive into a new shape. This is the quiet crisis of the rush versus the reed, the moment botany rewrote handwriting. And the strangest part is that you can still watch the switch happening, stroke by stroke, right there in the ink. We usually explain script changes with big cultural forces, conquest, religion, empire. Those matter. But this video is about something more physical and honestly more surprising, the mechanics of the pen itself. Because the way an instrument deposits ink, soft or hard, wide or fine, dragged or pressed, quietly dictates what letters can comfortably look like. Get the tool wrong in your head, and the whole late evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts stops making sense. Get it right, and you can read the fingerprints of a plant in the final centuries of Egyptian writing. This is where archaeobotany, the study of ancient plants, and paleography, the study of ancient handwriting, collide, and the collision turns out to be far more literal than it sounds. Start with the original Egyptian tool, the rush. Scribes cut a stem of a marsh plant, a rush of the genus Juncus, which grew in the salty wetlands of the delta, and rather than sharpening it to a point, they cut it at an angle and then bruised and chewed the tip until the natural fibers frayed into a tiny brush. That is the key detail. The Egyptian rush pen is not a nib. It is a brush. It writes by painting, dragging soft fibers loaded with ink across the papyrus. And a brush gives you a very particular kind of line, fluid, tapering, thick, where you press, and thin, where you lift, full of natural swells and hairline finishes. Every graceful, painterly quality of hieratic and early demotic comes from that frayed rush tip. You can see exactly this quality in hieratic copies of the Book of the Dead, those long, flowing papyrus scrolls where the rush brush is at its most expressive, producing columns of text that look almost like painted calligraphy. It's worth pausing on how humble this tool was. Botanists identify it as a species of Juncus, the rushes that thrive in brackish coastal wetlands, a plant most people would step right over without a glance. The stem is slender, barely a couple of millimeters across, and the fibers are soft, so the ink travels through them by simple capillary action, wicking along exactly the way it does in a paintbrush. It cost nothing. It grew wild in the marshes, and Egyptian scribes used it, essentially unchanged, for 3,000 years, one of the longest unbroken runs of any writing tool in human history. No other people stuck with a single pen so faithfully for so long. Now the newcomer. As Greeks settled Egypt in large numbers, first under the Ptolemies, then under Rome, they brought their own writing tool, the reed pen, kalamos in Greek, kalamos in Latin. This is a different plant and a different principle entirely. It is cut from a thicker, woodier reed, phragmites, and instead of being frayed into a brush, it is sharpened to a firm point and then split down the middle, creating a nib with a slit that channels the ink. That split nib does not paint. It presses and drags a harder, more even line. It holds a reservoir. It wants to be lifted and set down in crisp, controlled strokes. In Greek hands, it wrote the Greek alphabet. The split does something the brush never could. It holds a small reservoir of ink and releases it in a controlled, even flow, so a writer can dash off long lines of small, uniform letters, perfect for the Greek documentary culture of contracts, accounts, and literature that flooded Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt. There's even a small irony in it. Roman writers prized the finest reed pens as coming from Egypt itself, the foreign tool, cut from a local plant. But this harder, sharper instrument did not stay in Greek hands. Put the two tools together and the clash is obvious the moment you try it. Demotic, Egypt's everyday cursive, the same Demotic script you can read on the Rosetta Stone, was designed over centuries for a brush. Its shapes assume soft, sweeping, modulated strokes that a frayed rush tip makes effortlessly. Now hand a scribe a hard, split-reed nib and ask him to write those same demotic shapes. He can't do it the old way. The nib snags on the downstrokes, splays if he presses, and refuses to give him that painterly taper. So he adapts. The strokes get thinner and more wiry. The generous curves tighten into angles. The script grows spikier, more cramped, more nervous. You are watching a plant's mechanics reshape a 2,000-year-old hand in real time. Papyrologists can even catch scribes stranded between the two worlds, bilingual documents where the same hand writes flowing Greek with the reed, then wrestles to force Egyptian shapes out of that same stiff nib. The Egyptian portions look visibly cramped, as if the tool itself is fighting the script it's being asked to draw. We can even see this in ostraca, the pottery sherds and limestone flakes scribes used for quick notes and receipts, where the informal, everyday hand shows the transition in its most unguarded, unpolished form. And then comes the clean break. When Egyptians began writing their own language in Greek letters, the script we call Coptic, they were doing it from the start with the Greek reed pen. Coptic keeps a small handful of extra letters borrowed from Demotic for Egyptian sounds the Greek alphabet couldn't spell. But watch those borrowed letters closely and you see the compromise written into them. Signs that were born as flowing rush-brush gestures now had to be executed with a stiff, split nib. So they stiffened too, squared off and simplified to survive on the new tool. Those few borrowed letters are the fossil record of the whole transition, carrying the memory of the rush in shapes now drawn with the reed. The very last gasp of the old system is precisely datable. The final Demotic inscription was carved at the Temple of Philae in 452 CE, a remote island sanctuary on the southern frontier of Egypt, where the old scribal traditions held on longest. After that, silence. Coptic is, in a real sense, the old Egyptian scripts forced through a Greek pen. The reed didn't just change Demotic, it helped end it. By the time Coptic became the everyday script of Christian Egypt, the rushbrush had all but vanished from the scribe's kit. And with it went the last of that fluid, painterly line. A 1,000-year visual signature, gone, because the tool that made it was gone. Here is the honest scholarly caution, because accuracy is the whole point. The reed pen was not the only force at work. Greek was the language of power, and that cultural pressure was enormous. Tool and culture pushed together. Historians are careful here, and so should we be. This was a gradual overlap, not a single dramatic morning when every scribe put down the rush and took up the reed. The two tools coexisted for generations, and the exact timing of the changeover is still argued at the edges. But the direction of travel is not in doubt. The physical evidence is undeniable. The tool changed, and the strokes changed with it, and the two line up in time. Writing, it turns out, has a body. Ink is a liquid, papyrus is a surface, and the pen is a machine with hard physical limits. Change the machine, and the letters have no choice but to bend. It's one of the clearest cases we have that writing is not a pure idea floating above the world. It is ink, plant fiber, and muscle. Zoom out, and the rush to read shift is a hidden hinge in the entire evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts. The graceful, brush-painted cursive of the pharaohs and the tight, wiry hand of Christian Egypt are separated, in part, by a swap of one weed for another. It is a humbling thought, a change in a marsh plant, rippling all the way up into the shape of a civilization's letters. So the next time you look at a piece of late Egyptian writing, don't just ask what it says. Ask what wrote it, a soft rush brush or a hard Greek reed. The answer is stamped into every stroke. And of all the documents that carry those fingerprints, none are more everyday or more revealing than the scribbled receipts of the Egyptian tax office. That's where we go next. Deciphering the tax receipts of Ptolemaic Egypt.